The corridors of the university hospital had always carried a particular kind of silence after dusk. A silence that felt less like peace and more like suspension, as if the building itself were holding its breath between crises. John Finnegan had grown accustomed to that silence. He found clarity in it, long after the administrative offices closed and the last visiting families drifted home. He remained in a narrow records room beneath fluorescent lights that hummed faintly overhead, immersed in old medical files for a research project that had begun as professional ambition but slowly turned into something more personal. He was studying rare blood phenotypes and hereditary anomalies, tracing patterns across decades of records, mapping invisible lines that connected strangers through biology. He believed in science as something clean and ordered, a system of truths waiting to be uncovered if one looked carefully enough. What he did not yet understand was that truth, once unearthed, did not always heal. Sometimes it detonated. He had requested access to archived files connected to rare blood types, particularly AB negative, one of the least common classifications. The database had flagged several cases across prominent Los Angeles families. Finn's curiosity sharpened not because of their wealth or status, but because anomalies in inheritance patterns fascinated him. He worked methodically, flipping through digitized scans and original hard copies stored in sealed boxes that smelled faintly of dust and antiseptic. The night deepened. His eyes burned, but he persisted. Then, tucked behind a mislabeled binder, he noticed a file bound in heavy gray stock, secured with a red seal that bore a stamped notation. Top secret, Spencer, Carter. The words did not belong in an academic archive. They belonged in a courtroom or a conspiracy. His pulse shifted almost imperceptibly as he reached for it. Finn was not a man given to melodrama, yet even he could sense that this folder carried weight. He hesitated only briefly before breaking the seal, telling himself that sealed did not mean inaccessible, that research sometimes brushed against sensitive terrain. Inside were laboratory results, transfusion histories, and genetic reports. The first page that caught his eye documented a patient with AB-negative blood. Extremely rare, requiring meticulous cross-matching protocols. The name printed at the top was Wyatt Spencer. Finn frowned. He knew the Spencer family well enough through social circles and past medical consultations. Wyatt's name in isolation would not have startled him, except that the next sheet in the folder contained transfusion compatibility charts referencing another patient with identical rare markers. Sheila Carter. Finn's breath caught. Coincidences occurred in medicine, of course, but the statistical probability of two unrelated individuals sharing such a rare phenotype demanded scrutiny. He read further. A confidential memorandum attached to the file referenced a covert investigation conducted years earlier at the behest of an unnamed party. The memo cited a DNA analysis performed discreetly. Results sealed pending family stabilization. Finn's fingers tightened around the pages as he scanned the conclusion. The report confirmed with 99.99% probability that Wyatt Spencer was the biological son of Sheila Carter and Bill Spencer. The room seemed to tilt. Finn felt the sterile order of the hospital dissolve into something unstable. His mind resisted the conclusion at first, searching for clerical errors, misfiled samples, contamination possibilities, but the documentation was meticulous. Sample numbers matched chain of custody logs. Lab technicians had signed off. There were no visible discrepancies. A second independent test had been conducted to eliminate doubt. The outcome had been identical. Wyatt Spencer, long believed to be solely Bill's son through another lineage narrative, was in fact the child of Bill and Sheila, a woman whose history of manipulation, violence, and obsession had scarred countless lives. Finn closed his eyes, pressing his thumb against his temple as if he could physically push the knowledge back into the folder. He understood better than most the destructive radius of Sheila's presence. She had infiltrated families, exploited vulnerabilities, and weaponized affection. The possibility that she had a biological claim to Wyatt was not simply a genealogical revelation. It was an earthquake beneath the Spencer Foundation. And Finn, by accident or fate, had just triggered the tremor. He did not sleep that night. Instead, he left the hospital with the folder secured in his briefcase, the city's early morning haze blurring the skyline as he drove toward the Spencer estate. His first instinct was to seek out Liam Spencer. Liam, steady and principled, would grasp the moral complexity before the emotional chaos. When Finn arrived, he found Liam alone, reviewing business reports, unaware that his world was seconds from fracture. Finn did not dramatize the discovery. He presented it clinically, laying the file on the desk between them. He walked Liam through the blood type correlation, the improbability of coincidence, the DNA confirmation. He watched comprehension dawn slowly in Liam's expression, followed by disbelief. Liam's instinct was protective. His thoughts leapt immediately to Wyatt, to how this knowledge might devastate him. He also considered Bill, whose pride and temper would not absorb such a truth quietly. Beneath those concerns, however, lay something more complicated, the realization that his own identity as Wyatt's brother would shift irrevocably. The bonds of brotherhood would remain, but the biological architecture beneath them would rearrange itself. They decided together that Wyatt deserved to hear it directly, not through rumor or accidental discovery. When Wyatt arrived later that day, summoned under the pretense of a family discussion, he entered casually, unaware of the gravity awaiting him. Finn watched him closely as Liam began to explain. Confusion gave way to irritation, then to raw disbelief. Wyatt's laughter at first sounded almost genuine, a reflexive rejection of absurdity. But as Finn produced the documentation, as he described the sealed investigation and the double-verified DNA analysis, the laughter dissolved. Wyatt's face drained of color. He shook his head repeatedly, as though repetition alone could undo biology. His entire narrative of self, his lineage, his sense of origin, had been stable ground. To learn that Sheila Carter, a name synonymous with chaos, was his biological mother felt like contamination. He spoke in fragments, denying plausibility, questioning motives, accusing someone of fabrication. Finn understood the stages of shock clinically, yet witnessing them in Wyatt's unraveling felt deeply human. Wyatt was not rejecting science. He was rejecting the implication that his blood carried Sheila's legacy. When Bill was informed, the reaction was volcanic. Bill's fury did not manifest as confusion but as outright defiance. He rejected the report's validity, accusing unseen enemies of orchestrating psychological warfare. The idea that he had fathered a child with Sheila, that he had unknowingly bound his lineage to hers, struck at the core of his identity as a man who prided himself on control. Bill had made ruthless decisions in business, but he believed he chose his entanglements. This revelation suggested he had been maneuvered, perhaps deceived. Rage masked something else, a flicker of guilt that he had once been close enough to Sheila for such a possibility to exist. The news spread with the inevitability of fire catching dry timber. Within hours, whispers moved through the Forrester and Logan families. Eric Forrester and Brooke Logan received calls layered with alarm. The concern was not merely scandal but strategy. If Sheila possessed biological leverage, she might exploit it. She had long demonstrated a talent for inserting herself into fractures. A son within the Spencer dynasty could become her most potent instrument. Or her most vulnerable point. Wyatt retreated inward. He avoided calls, avoided mirrors. The knowledge clung to him like a second skin he could not shed. He replayed memories of his childhood, searching for clues he might have missed, moments that hinted at hidden truth. Every argument with Bill, every difference in temperament between himself and Liam, now appeared suspect. He wondered whether traits he disliked in himself were inherited from Sheila. The question of identity, once philosophical, became visceral. Who was he if half his origin story had been fabricated or concealed? Was love sufficient to override biology, or did blood assert itself regardless of will? Liam stayed near him, offering presence rather than platitudes. Liam's compassion was genuine, yet he too grappled with recalibration. Wyatt was still his brother, but now also the son of a woman who had terrorized their extended circle. Liam feared what this revelation might do to Wyatt's stability. He feared, too, what Sheila might attempt if she sensed opportunity. Their conversations circled the same unresolved axis. Whether truth, however painful, was preferable to ignorance. Finn believed it was. Wyatt was less certain. In a distant corner of Los Angeles, Sheila Carter received word through channels she cultivated meticulously. Her reaction was not shock. It was satisfaction, slow and measured. She had always understood the power of timing. If the world now knew what she had long suspected or concealed, she would not waste the moment. A biological son within the Spencer Empire represented validation, perhaps even redemption in her own distorted calculus. Whether Wyatt embraced her or rejected her outright mattered less than the fact that she could claim him. As the episode drew toward its closing beat, Wyatt stood alone in a dimly lit room. The city lights beyond the window fractured by tears he refused to acknowledge. He stared into nothing, yet saw everything unraveling at once. His name, his lineage, his future, all felt suspended. Across town, Sheila's faint, knowing smile suggested that for her, the revelation was not an ending but a beginning. The camera might have lingered on Wyatt's silent devastation, but the true tension lay in the invisible thread now binding him to a woman whose shadow stretched long and dark over every life she touched. The silence that followed the revelation did not settle. It thickened. In the days after the truth surfaced, Los Angeles seemed to continue its glittering rhythm. Runways prepared for Forrester showings. Spencer Publications pushed forward with new campaigns. The Logan women navigated their own romantic entanglements. But beneath that polished exterior, something corrosive moved quietly through the foundations of every connected family. Wyatt's identity crisis was not an isolated implosion. It was a fault line running beneath the Spencers, the Forresters, and anyone who had ever suffered because of Sheila's relentless hunger to belong. Wyatt refused to see Sheila. That was his first and only clear decision. Bill had made it equally clear that Sheila would not step foot anywhere near his son. Biological or not. Yet the harder Bill tried to seal the perimeter, the more suffocating it became for Wyatt. Protection began to feel indistinguishable from control. Bill stationed security at the house, barked orders at staff, threatened legal injunctions against anyone who attempted to contact Wyatt on Sheila's behalf. His fury was volcanic, but beneath the eruption lay something he could not name: fear. Not fear of Sheila alone, but fear that blood carried influence. Fear that Wyatt might feel compelled, by curiosity, by longing, by anger, to seek out the woman who now represented half of his genetic inheritance. Liam watched this escalation with growing unease. He understood his father's instinct to dominate a threat, to crush it before it took form. But this was not a hostile takeover or a corporate rival. This was Wyatt's psyche. Liam spent long evenings sitting with his brother in the dim light of the guest house, listening to the fragments Wyatt could articulate. The questions circled obsessively. Had Sheila known all along? Had Bill? Why had the DNA test been buried? Who had ordered it sealed? Each question opened another chamber of doubt. Wyatt felt as if every memory of his childhood was being re-examined under a harsher light. He searched for signs, moments when he felt different, alien, disconnected. Now even harmless childhood rebellions felt sinister, as though they might be evidence of inherited volatility. Finn carried his own burden. He had not intended to become the detonator of this explosion. His training told him that truth, particularly medical truth, must be honored. Yet the human cost weighed on him. He replayed the moment he broke the red seal, wondering if he should have consulted hospital ethics committees, if he should have alerted legal authorities before approaching the family. But he also knew that withholding the information would have been another layer of deception. Finn understood better than most the toxic effect of secrets festering in the dark. He had seen what hidden parentage and denied connections could do. Silence did not neutralize truth, it weaponized it. Meanwhile, whispers of Sheila's reaction filtered back through indirect channels. She had not stormed the Spencer estate. She had not issued public declarations. Instead, she was patient. That patience unsettled everyone more than rage would have. Sheila's strategy had always relied on timing, on waiting for emotional fractures to widen before inserting herself as the misunderstood savior. If Wyatt felt abandoned by Bill's authoritarian fury, if he felt smothered by Liam's protective pity, Sheila would be there to frame herself as the only one who truly understood him. That possibility haunted Bill. Bill's anger eventually turned inward. In the privacy of his office, long after the shouting had subsided, he confronted the reality that he had once been drawn to Sheila. Whether through manipulation or genuine attraction hardly mattered now. The fact remained that he had been close enough to create a child with her. The revelation threatened his carefully curated narrative of dominance and control. Bill had always believed that he chose his alliances and survived his mistakes. But a son born of Sheila was not a mistake he could simply buy off or intimidate into silence. It was living proof of vulnerability. The Forrester family reacted with a mixture of horror and strategic calculation. Eric, with decades of scandal behind him, understood that legacy could survive many storms. But Sheila was not an ordinary storm. Brooke worried not only about the emotional fallout for Liam and Wyatt but about the broader destabilization of alliances. If Sheila gained even symbolic leverage within the Spencer circle, the ripple effects could touch every intertwined relationship. Old wounds reopened at the mere mention of her name. The idea that she now possessed a biological tether to one of Bill's sons revived fears long buried. Wyatt's internal struggle deepened, anger at Sheila warred with a forbidden curiosity. He hated the thought of being connected to her. Yet he could not silence the instinct to understand. What traits did he share with her? Was his impulsiveness inherited? His stubborn streak? He despised himself for even asking. To acknowledge similarity felt like betrayal, to Bill, to Liam, to himself. And yet, ignoring biology did not erase it. He began to experience an unsettling dissociation, as though his reflection in the mirror belonged to someone else. He questioned whether love defined parentage or whether blood inevitably shaped destiny. Liam sensed that Wyatt's greatest fear was not Sheila's manipulation but the possibility that he might resemble her in ways he could not control. Liam tried to anchor him in shared history. They had grown up together. They had fought, reconciled, supported each other. No DNA test could erase those lived years. But Liam also wrestled privately with a new dynamic. Wyatt was no longer simply his brother, he was Sheila's son. That fact lodged in Liam's consciousness like a splinter. He hated himself for the instinctive recoil he felt when he first processed it. Compassion battled prejudice inside him. As the tension mounted, Sheila made her move, not with intrusion, but with a letter. It arrived without return address, written in restrained, almost clinical language. She did not claim Wyatt. She did not demand recognition. She wrote about destiny, about the inevitability of truth rising. She described the pain of separation, framing herself as a woman denied her child by powerful forces. The letter was calculated to bypass Bill's defenses and strike directly at Wyatt's sense of abandonment. When Wyatt read it, his hands trembled. He recognized manipulation, yet he also felt the ache of a narrative he had never known. Bill exploded when he learned of the letter. He interpreted it as an act of psychological warfare. His response was immediate: legal teams, restraining orders, threats of prosecution. But Wyatt surprised him by pushing back. For the first time since the revelation, Wyatt's anger focused not on Sheila but on Bill. He accused his father of controlling the narrative, of deciding what truths were permissible. He demanded to know who had ordered the original DNA test and why it had been buried. Bill's silence in that moment spoke louder than denial. Whether he had known or merely suspected, whether he had chosen ignorance over confrontation, Wyatt sensed that this secret had been managed, not discovered. That confrontation marked a turning point. Wyatt no longer felt like a passive victim of revelation. He began to assert agency. He did not embrace Sheila, but he refused to let Bill dictate his emotional response. This defiance terrified Bill more than any external threat. The possibility that Sheila's blood might embolden Wyatt to rebel felt like prophecy fulfilled. Finn observed the unfolding drama with increasing concern. He feared that the family's polarization would create exactly the vacuum Sheila needed. If Wyatt felt forced to choose between loyalty and curiosity, he might drift toward the very influence they sought to block. Finn attempted to position himself as neutral ground, a physician who valued truth but also emotional stability. He encouraged Wyatt to seek counseling, to process identity in a structured way rather than in reactive bursts of anger. Whether Wyatt would accept that guidance remained uncertain. As tensions escalated, the episode closed on a tableau heavy with unresolved possibility. Wyatt stood alone again, but this time not in paralysis. He held Sheila's letter in one hand and his phone in the other. Torn between blocking her number forever and dialing it. Across town, Sheila watched the city lights from a balcony, her expression serene, almost maternal. She understood that she did not need to force entry into the Spencer family. Biology had already done that for her. The question was no longer whether the truth would change Wyatt's life. It was how far that change would ripple, and whether the next fracture would split the family beyond
Oh.